A few months ago, I visited a botanical garden that had the most magical displays of flowers and colors. And when I came home, I was filled up with inspiration. Spending time in nature and looking at flowers in particular really inspires me. I'm Cherie Burbach, a mixed media artist and writer. As an intuitive painter, I'm often asked how I get inspired to paint some of my whimsical, colorful paintings. I paint from my imagination, and I also take inspiration from the beauty I see in this world. I like to transform the things I see into paintings or artful projects. Matisse is quoted as saying that there are always flowers for those who want to see them. This is how it is for me when I spend time in nature and then come back to my studio. I still see the flowers and gardens I visited in my mind, but I also have this vision of a world outside of this one where there is hope and possibility. As I walk through this botanical garden, I pay attention to what pulls my eye in. I'm naturally drawn to color, so the vibrant pinks, reds, and oranges get my attention. But then I see a patch of flowers with black leaves. They are so beautiful against all that color, and it makes me stop and look at them more closely. This combination of colorful florals with black leaves stays with me as I stroll through the garden. I remember that at home I have a black globe I picked up at a flea market. I love scouring rummages and thrift stores to find art supplies, and this particular globe has been sitting in my studio for quite a while, just waiting for the right project. The black of the globe is so striking to me, and it reminds me of the leaves I see, so I keep it in the back of my mind. As I continue walking, I'm drawn to how many rounded shapes and buildings there are. I'm someone that often includes circular images in my art. I've always been influenced by that shape, and to me it represents a calmness, a completeness, and there is something about it that I find comforting. So it's no wonder I keep seeing all the ways that circles keep popping up in my garden walk. I especially loved these little alcoves with circular windows. Each window perfectly framed out a unique scene that highlighted one color of flower or just offered a different viewpoint. When I looked out each window, I felt transported to a different world. I realized then that I wanted to bring the inspiration from this place to my art globe project back in my studio. The first thing to do with a project like this is to make sure the surface you're painting on is clean. Since I bought the globe a while ago, it was covered with dust. I took a dry paper towel and just wiped the entire thing off. Next up is to gather your supplies. For this, I'm using a variety of acrylic paints. I'm choosing colors that draw me in, and while I'm still remembering the colors I saw at the botanical garden, I'm not overthinking the choices. I put a variety on my palette and went with it. I'm also using regular acrylic brushes. After giving the globe a couple twirls, I feel like I want to start on the top portion. So I grabbed some heavy body acrylic paint in white to use as a color blocker. I like Golden Brand for this. Doing this first step allows the regular body acrylics I'm using to cover completely without having to fight with the black paper of the globe. I'm thinking back to the reds and oranges I saw at the gardens and using that as my jump-off point. I'm adding a base of orange over the white, and when I do that, notice how it instantly stands out. If I was just to put the orange directly onto the globe, the orange would not be as vibrant. The heavy body white allows it to stand on its own. I'll be adding more details to these orange flowers later, but for now, I'm focusing on the bright pinkish, reddish, purple flowers I saw. The combination of their colors was inspiring, and I liked the rounded shape of some of them. I use a color blocking method to paint these as well, starting with the white and adding the vibrant red blend. I'll be adding more detail to these later also, but for now, I'm adding the initial base layer. After this, I'm thinking about those rounded windows I spotted throughout the gardens and I want to add this type of element to my art globe. So I begin by painting a rounded shape with white and green and blue. I'm purposely adding a color that is different from the rest of the globe so I can distinguish this as a type of imaginary portal to another world. I add purple around the window and bring it down to create a sort of rounded entrance. I'm remembering the buildings that house many of these rounded windows I saw and using them as inspiration. Using a light green, I add some leaves. I have to admit, this is always my favorite way to add design to a work. I enjoy painting them and find that leaves are a real unifier in art projects. They seem to pull everything together. At the Botanical Garden, there were these winding paths that would take you from one place to another. And the leaves on this art globe mimic that for me. They pull your eye along from one part of the painting to the other. I start on the leaves for the pink flowers next, and once again, I'm using a color blocking method. I add the white first, and then the light green. This particular green also has a little bit of sparkle in the paint, which adds another whimsical touch. I add that green to the other leaves I painted, and then the portal window. Adding layer upon layer of the same color is another way to provide more vibrancy in your art projects. When that's done, my mind goes back to the pink flowers and specifically the rounded florals I saw at the Botanical Gardens. Those smaller flowers added such a sweet touch to the rest of the vignette, like small dots that help fill in the overall picture. So I add that element to my globe next, starting with color blocking and adding pigment over it. Once again, I'll be adding details to this later, but for now, I'm building the base for these flowers. Next up, I'm thinking back to the gardens and the pops of yellow I saw. There were beautiful, vibrant flowers paired up with different types of plants that just flowed in the breeze. These elements helped break up the vibrant colors and gave your eye a chance to rest. You'll notice I'm still taking the elements from the gardens and adding them with my own style. In this case, it's the wispy flowers I'm adding, starting with the white and then again building the yellow on top of it. You don't have to paint something exactly in order to be inspired by it. Intuitive painting is often like this, where you actively notice the colors and shapes and the way the flowers move in the breeze, and then you take that feel with you as you paint. I continue with the yellows by adding smaller flowers throughout the globe, and then I turn my attention to the bottom. Painting on a rounded surface like this means you have more space to create, and if somebody wants to rotate the globe, there should be something interesting for them to see. So I start with white and add the yellow over it all along the bottom to create long, wispy stems that I imagine blowing in the breeze like the ones I saw at the Botanical Gardens. When I finish adding the bottom stems, I do the same thing on the top of the globe. Going back to the bottom again, I add some green stems over the yellow to provide some depth and then do the same thing on the top of the globe. The greens I'm using have me thinking about the Botanical Gardens and the variations of greenery I saw along the paths and against each building. The greens are so soothing to me, and I add a bit more of that color to the globe, making sure that I balance it throughout the whole surface. During my walk at the Botanical Gardens, I took note of how the details of the flowers pulled me in to get a closer look. It wasn't just about the overall colors and feel, but the textures and patterns on each individual flower or even each garden element. So for the next step on my globe, I'm using my paint pens to create some of those detailed elements. I focus on the green leaves and add some lines to the edges and surface of each one. Then I add color to the centers of each of the yellow flowers. And then I turn my attention to the pinkish red flowers. In nature, there is so much detail when you get up close, so I use that as my inspiration, but once again, I'm making it my own by adding black. I like how black helps frame out all the different elements like this. I frequently add black and white at the end of my paintings. They are both good for unifying and also adding the right type of detail to your work. And When I think about the gardens I walked, there were many white and silver and black elements that did the same thing. I take note of them as I add a silver paint pen to add details to the art globe. I start with that portal window and add silver leaves to frame it out. When that's complete, I turn my attention back to the flowers, and I'm using a large black paint pen to add details. Then I switch to a larger yellow pen to add details to the centers. The yellow helps tie in with the rest of the yellow found elsewhere on the globe. I'm thinking again of the brick buildings that held the rounded windows. I want to add that element to my globe around the portal window I'm creating. The brick, for me, helped define that little space as special and something you stepped into in order to view another world. That's the way I looked at it and how I felt about stepping into those little alcoves. So I add a similar element to the globe using that same silver pen I used for the leaves. After that, I go back over any flower or leaf that I feel needs detail, and I use my paint pens to add lines and design elements. When I'm finished with that, I take a final look and feel that it's done the way I want it to be. I love that this type of project can be just one more way you can bring art into your home.